Hello, my name's Colleen and we are here for the Journey of a Story series with The Room to Write. And today we're speaking to Eileen Doyon, and we're going to find out how she writes, what she writes, and a lot more about the nonfiction writing genre. So welcome, Eileen.
Oh, thank you very much, Colleen. I'm very honored and excited to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. And we're going to start out, how we often start out is just to get a picture of what does you writing look like? So, you know, where do you write? What's your method of writing, and sort of how did you get started into writing? Any of those, wherever you want to start off.
Okay. Well, I'll start out with, first of all, I never intended on writing a book in my life. And my dad passed away of lung cancer in 2011. And that was very devastating to me because I was really close to my dad. It really just tore my heart out. And I had lost a couple of my members of my family back in the 80s, and I don't think I ever had an opportunity to really grieve. I just kind of jumped into my career, and that's what I did to kind of get through that. But after my dad passed away, I knew I was bad. And I was smart enough to know that I was bad. So what did I do? As I Google searched, you know, what to do. And they said to journal. And they said, start a journal. So I started a journal, and I did that for about 2 weeks. And then because of my personality, I said, you know what? This is boring. It's not enough for me. What else can I do? So I said, okay, Danny, my husband, I said, I'm going to write a book about my dad. And then he's looking at me, and I said, okay, you and I are going to be the only ones that read it, right? And he says, yep, exactly. And I said, okay. Well, my dad actually had, he was in World War II. He quit high school when he was 17. He became a Marine, and his boots hit Iwo Jima when he was 17, and he was there for 31 days out of 36. And he, you know, served on foreign soil for about 3 years in World War II. And, you know, they were part of the greatest generation, and they never talked about the war. We never talked about it. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know my father was in Iwo Jima until a few months before he died, going through papers. So the military is very dear to my heart. My husband and I are peas greeters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where we live. So I said, you know what, Danny, I want to do a dedication or a tribute to my dad. And if I feel like this, there's got to be other women that feel the same way. And so what did I do? I reached out to my friends, because all the girls that I went to high school with were all the same age. Our dads mostly fought in World War II, and they were thrilled. And so I got their stories. I put you know, an outline together, and the feedback
So you asked them for their stories as well?
For their stories.
Okay.
And the feedback that I got from them was incredible. They said, you know what, I knew that my dad did this, but everything was scattered all over, and now I've compiled it in a book, and I can give it to my grandkids, I can give it to my relatives. And I said to Danny, you know what, I think I have something here. And and this was supposed to just be a healing project, selfishly for myself, but for other women as well. And plus tributes to our dads, which was incredible.
And had all their dads passed away? So this was sort of they had to, how did they get the stories? Did they know the stories already, or did they have to research? Did they have to ask relatives?
A little of both. Well, a lot of both. Because sometimes, because they never really talked about the war in that generation, you had to go out and you had to do some research and digging, which I did with one of my cousins for some additional information on my dad. And I think that's what made it so good, because unfortunately in the world, sometimes we don't do things or put things together until something negative happens, and then we're kind of forced to do things. And it was just incredible.
So what was that process for you? Like, how did you gather, what was the gathering process like? Talking to your relatives, or did you actually have to go do research with the military records and things like that, or?
Great question. What I did for me is I had one uncle that was still alive. He died actually 6 months after my dad did, but I reached out to a couple of them. I got information from his records that I had found, and I put that together. And then the other thing that I did, I don't know, I want to say I was smart enough to do this, but I thought, okay, it's not going to be 2,000 words per person. So I kept it to like around 1,000 words. And 1,000 words isn't that much. It's a lot, but it's not. And I said, okay, well, let's get photographs of our dad, and if we had him, you know, what branch of the service, how long did he serve for, you know, what did he do after the service, what would you say to him now, you know, after, you know, gathering your information. So I just kind of went with it, and it just flowed. And, you know, and I reached out, you know, social media, you know, to my friends, and I even had people that I didn't know. I had a couple people that I was just friends on Facebook with that actually contributed a story in my book.
Wow.
And it was great. And then, like I said, I got so much feedback after that. I had, I mentioned my uncle passed away 6 months after my dad. Long story short, my grandmother always had a chandelier over her dining room table, and it was packed in a box in a corner. And after my uncle died, I just said, you know, I'd like to have that, you know, from his wife, my aunt. And so I had to check with one of my uncles and my cousins, and they said, no, we want you to have it. So I just remember that piece from family relatives of, you know, the Italian, the hands are going, and, you know, and I can just see everyone sitting around the table, and I said, if I feel this way, Colleen, about a keepsake, there's got to be other women that feel the same way. So I did the same thing, but I did it with keepsakes. We had, the stories were incredible. We had one woman, she was in her early 30s, she only had 12 weeks to live. She went out and bought her 5 best, closest friends a plate, I'll probably cry, you know, with a saying on it, and gave that to them. So, you know, I had one woman that wrote about that. I had a little girl, 8 years old, write about her grandfather. And just, you know, it just made people feel good. It was very inspiring. So after those two
what
books,
a wonderful way to heal in a healthy way too. That is a sharing, which often when we're talking to writers, it is an isolating until you do share it. But this was sharing while you're writing. So what part of that, how did that help you, just even hearing these stories that you compiled?
It helped me in a lot of ways. It helped me to heal. It helped me to give me direction that everyone wants to write a book. You can, everyone at some point in their life will say, I should write a book. I want to write a book. You know, you hear it with the people that you're connected with, I'm sure. And, you know, you have some people that have written a book and it's stuck in a drawer for 20 years. And then they pull it out. It's just something that people do at a certain particular time. So I said to Danny, you know what, I really give people an opportunity, everyday people, to write.
Right.
You know, you don't have to be, you know, David Ortiz, who wrote a book after he retired from the Red Sox. You know, everyone's going to buy his book because we all have things to say. And there is something so healing and so inspiring about writing, like how they told me about journal to feel better, because you can make a post on Facebook.
Right.
It's not the same when you pick up a pen and you write from your heart.
So what's the difference, do you think?
The difference is because there's more heart. I think it's deeper when you write it. It was deeper for me because I have written a story in every one of my books so far. And I think that we have a lot of things that are hidden or buried inside of us. And I think when you have to pick up a pen and you have to start writing, it's so different than this.
Right.
Each one has a good purpose, don't get me wrong. But I think that we, especially in the world we live in, I think we're missing the personal touch. I think people are longing for that. I hear it all the time. And the comments and the notes and the feedback that I get from people that thank, and it's not me, you know, it's the goal, my mission, that thank me for having them have the opportunity to write. You know, right now I'm gathering stories for my next book, and I'm getting stories in, and the emails and the messages and the phone calls I'm getting are just incredible.
Awesome. And so, and I really like your, the idea and the digging between the journal writing, and, you know, it is sort of ironic that in this online world where we are putting so much information out there, and, you know, is that censored? I mean, is it that your journal writing isn't self-censored,
That's right.
that you feel like you can really write, whereas maybe you're thinking, do you think there's sort of a layer of, you know, censoring that you're doing when you when you post something online?
And I think because it's so personal, the theme that I choose is so personal, and I have some people that will say, like, I usually just give people an outline, like, to help them get going, because I really want it to come from their heart.
Right.
And, you know, and I had one woman, I remember, Jeannie, and she said, Eileen, she was writing a story about her mom had passed away. And that was very difficult and challenging for her to do. And she says, I just can't do it. And I said, Jeannie, it's not a job. You have to do this. You know, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to pick up a pen and write right now. Just, you know, you've written, so you know you can't do that. You have to write when it comes to you. And I said, you know, it might be like late at night. It might be early in the morning. It's not a have-to job. Just think of your mom and just say, you know, ask her to help you along, and it will come to you, and it always does. You know, it always does.
And I think, you know, you have to admit your part that you're playing is, even though you're saying it's not a job and you have to wait for the inspiration, you're providing that end to that, to the means to the end, which I think a lot of people do need. And so I think that the service that you're providing is, you know, write when you want, but let's go.
Right, exactly.
You know, and people do need that. You know, they need that incentive, and I think
kind of a little kick in the butt sometimes to get us going. You know, and that's okay. That's the way we are, because you know what? Life's out there. You've got this going and that going and all these other things, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, one more thing, I have to do this.
Right.
But if you want to get things done, you always figure it out, because we all have 24 hours in a day. We just have to figure it out.
And so, so it started out as journal writing for you, and so that a lot of those journal entries, do they make them into the book, or do you do sort of a separate sit down and now this writing is for the book, and sort of walk us through what's the process? Like, do you critique it with a group? Do you run it by people? Do you go through a million drafts, or is 3 drafts it, or what is the actual process of the writing that you do?
Let me know if I'm on the right path of your question.
And also, what's the process for receiving the writing from others? Do you know, how do you, I'm sure it's hard to say, do you need to reword things, or how does that, you know, I mean, it's a whole different way with such sentimental stories too.
What I do is I do 1 book a year. And what I generally do is I start in January, right after the holidays, because no one, you know, especially living in New England, you know, what do you do? But I've actually had people from 8 different countries that have written in my books. Wow. And, you know, and I actually ask people, I get a lot of referrals now, but I look for people, and I just trust my gut and say, I think this person might have a story that would go along with what I'm doing. So I ask them, you know, I always get a date, you know, of when I'd like to have it by, give them an outline, have them check out my information, and then sometimes people will send me a draft and just say, you know, what do you think? Am I on the right path? And it is challenging sometimes, and I have had to do it. But it is a business, and it is for them, and it's for the person also that they're talking about. You want to make sure you're paying honor, you know, to that person, whether they're alive or passed, depending on the theme of the book. And people are okay with that, and I think they appreciate it, because I'm representing, you're writing in my book, I'm representing you. So I'm representing all these people. So I gather the information, I go through the stories and everything myself. I have a marketing person. My first 4 books, I had a self-publisher, so that was an experience, a whole story on that experience. Right. And then, because of my personality, I wanted more control, and when I wanted things done, I wanted it done. So I decided, I have a marketing person that works part-time for me, and I said, gee, you know, do you think that you can do this? She said, we'll figure it out, and I go through CreateSpace now.
Okay.
So what we do is we take those stories, she goes through that whole process of CreateSpace. So we put it through their process. You know, she does the editing, the compiling, we put everything together. This will be our 4th book, so we're a lot smarter now on how we set up the pages and do things like that. I let people know when the book's going to be out, and then I kind of.
So what is that timeline? Is it generally the same timeline if you're starting in January for your stories. What's, when are the books usually coming out? By the end of the year already, or does it take a while?
Like, as I mentioned before, I kind of get smarter as I go through. My goal was to do one book a year. I would do 3 a year if I could. But what I did previously, most of my books came out around May. But as my books got bigger and my stories got more, I really last year I had to go an extra month. That didn't come out until the end of June. So I said, okay, I'm not going to do that this year. When I say it's going to happen, I want it to happen then. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to wait, and this book's going to come out right after Labor Day. And I think it's perfect timing. My stories are coming in now. So, the editing process, going through, compiling, putting everything together, it's really going to work good.
Right.
Very well.
And so you do it through CreateSpace. And what are some things maybe that you've learned that you wish you knew with your first book that you could share with writers who do want to self-publish as well?
If you haven't used a self-publisher, I encourage people to do that. I always recommend go to a bookstore, try to get a reference, a recommendation, a referral from someone, which I did. And they have a menu that you go through, and you choose what you want them to do, what you don't want them to do, and obviously it's very cost effective rather than going to a publisher. And
so CreateSpace is not the publisher?
CreateSpace is the publisher, but we do, when you go through a self-publisher, they contract out like 5 different people. Like each one person might do this, one person does this, one person does that. They ship it to, usually down south, have the book published, and then you get it, and things like that.
And is there one that you would recommend that you usually go with, or is it just whoever's available at the time through CreateSpace?
Well, now I go through CreateSpace, and then my marketing person does the bulk of it. Like I said, this will be her 3rd book that she's done.
Okay.
So I recommend, if you want to do a book, do it. Just figure it out, and that's what I did. I had no clue what I was doing, and I just, my husband's like, okay, you're going to write a book. No, well, I'm actually going to do 2, Danny. I'm going to do this one, and then this one's going to come out a few months later. Okay. I think he knew how bad I was, that I needed something, and I just threw myself in the whole thing, and I needed to do that. And my first books, I mean, they were awesome because they were healing and inspiring, but to put the book together, I look at it now and I'm like, oh my God, I would have done this different, that different, and things like. Of course, we do that as people, anyways, And but on my my other one, I got lost off track. But my one that we ended up doing on CreateSpace, my marketing person, I did the scratch surface. I go through and do the editing, making sure everything's formatted right, things like that. I send it to her. She goes through and does another editing, grammar, because we don't change words, because you go to a publishing company and lots of times they change words and they say things you can't do and you can do and things like that. Whereas, and that's the other beauty about the book, people say, Eileen, I've never written anything in my life. And I said, that's great. That's what I want. It's everyday people. Your story told by you is kind of my tagline. So, and then we do it to CreateSpace, and CreateSpace they have a menu too of things that you can have them do if you would like. And then you get a copy back, and you go through it, and of course it's never perfect on the first one, and that's okay. And you go through it maybe like 4 or 5 times, and then you say, okay, hit the button. Okay, it's a go. And it's pretty exciting.
And so from like a business point of view, now is this your day job, or no, this is not your day job?
It is not yet.
Okay.
And
most writers it isn't.
Exactly. And I think people have to know that, Colleen. I think it's so important. Everyone wants to write a book and they want to be, a top bestseller. And of course, who doesn't want to be? But it's hard work. I work an 8 to 5 job. When I did my first couple of books, where I'd get up at 1 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and I'd go down and start writing outlines or trying to get, figure things out. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And now I have a system. I get up I'm up by 5, 4:45, 5 o'clock. I work until 5:45, and I do my social media, anything to do with my book, whether it's social media, gathering stories, connecting with people, answering any questions, editing stories. That's my time. I work 8 to 5. I come home during lunch. I check my social media, and then I come home. I spend an hour of time, life balance, spend an hour with my husband, and then I spend an hour and a half on my books, and then the rest of the time's with my husband.
Wow. And I've heard that you really do need to be pretty regimented in making time each day to try to do some writing, even if it's just, something that doesn't necessarily go into your end product.
Yeah.
And so that sort of was not something you used to do, but you've started doing that.
I do. I have to. And weekends, but I've come to the point where if I want to take a night off, I take a night off because I know the time that I put in and the energy that I put into it. And if something comes up, if we have friends in from out of town or whatever, well, you know what, they're priority. Right. And my books are offline for now, and that's okay because I know how hard I work. It's not like, I kind of, and again, but it's being committed. I'm committed, and people do have to be committed, Colleen, in order to write a book.
Right.
Otherwise, they're just going to say it's going to be in their folder for 20 years.
Right. Now, with nonfiction, how does that work with, say, like, do you have to get copyrights from each of these authors that contribute, or how does that work? Is it complicated legally, or what did you learn from, what's that process
Another
like?
great question. I actually put a form together. I did research. I put a release together, and I tweaked it a little bit, but not too much. And I'm actually kind of honored to say I've had 3 people that I've done podcasts with, and they've used my release to have me sign it. And I'm like, they said, you don't mind if I use your release? It might look familiar. And I'm like, no, that's okay. But I'm flattered, I'm flattered that they did that. And you have to cover yourself legally. Otherwise, I think last year I had one person that, and I said to her, you know what, so-and-so, if I don't have your release, your story can't go in the book. So, kind of get you on the thing. So you have to protect yourself.
Right. And so how did it go from you felt you needed to write your book and then to a compilation? I know you said you were reaching out to your friends. So did you always feel like you wanted it to be a sort of a group effort, or did somewhere along the way when you were starting to write about your dad, did you feel, how did that did it transform, or was it always you wanted to have it be a bunch of stories?
I wanted to write a book about my dad, and as I said, Danny just looked at me, and I'm like, okay, no one's going to read it but you and I. And once I reached out to people and got feedback, I said, I've got so much feedback. I'm onto something. This is too good. And it's funny because I had to come up with a name of my series, like ASAP, before everything was being published, and you have to get an LLC and all this other stuff. And I'm like, talked about being under the gun, and we just figured it out. So.
And what's the name of your series?
Unforgettable Faces and Stories. Okay. So I wanted to have a good umbrella, if you will, that it would cover everything, and it really does.
Okay. And so from a business point of view, do you make money off of your books, or is it just enough to sort of cover the costs of your marketing person? What's sort of the business side end goal? And then also, do you feel like you've gotten your creative side goal as well? So sort of how do those two things work? Because you made a great point of everybody has a story to tell, and just having it in paper and expressing it is cathartic as well as fulfilling in so many ways. But at what point maybe did this seem like it could make business sense, and does it? Has that been realized? And sort of talk about that a little bit.
Sure, and I think a lot of people need to hear it because everyone thinks that their book's going to be a million top seller and all this other stuff. 2 of my books have been bestsellers on Amazon when they first went out. Can I quit my day job? No. My books, it does get better and better every year, that I will tell you. Obviously, I wouldn't be on my 8th one if it didn't, but it's not going to allow me to leave my day job as of yet. But what I've developed is, by accident, is that I think it's important for people to know you can't just write one book and expect overnight success. So you have to parlay, or you have to go in other directions. That's led. And what I'm doing now is, on this book, I've developed a program for kids helping kids with a charity, with tying in with my theme. And I've gone to school, did a presentation of 43rd graders, you know, and they're participating, you know, and so now I'm going to do a children's book. Wonderful. From that, and I would love to get into schools because I think it's important for kids to write. Mm-hmm. I think it's important for, you know, my theme is on first responders, but I only say that because I think that those are big shoes to fill. Mm-hmm. You know, with first responders, they're so important in our life, in our community, our service, and our family. And we have to have backup people to fill those shoes. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, it's somewhat unfortunately taboo to some extent. Mm. And I think it's important for kids to hear the good stories, the good things, the good satisfaction, and not just bad stuff in the world we live in. So that's kind of another mission.
And they look up to them so much, so it's sort of a perfect fit.
And it was awesome because when I was in the school, after we got done, there were two policemen. I did it at my home school, and there were two policemen walking around, and to watch them interact with the kids was incredible. And you know, so I was talking to one of them afterwards, and he says they come up every day, and they don't set us time. They just come in and they just talk with the kids in the world we live in. But I think it's important for kids to have, and for the kids to talk about, you know, first responders and just their enthusiasm and stuff to get them going, if you will, and to be an author. You know, the teachers were thrilled, and that was the whole thing. They brought me in, and I talked about being an author and getting them involved and having them doing some reading, and then, you know, you take it to the next step. And I really liked that. I really felt that, you know what, I think that there's something here, and that so that's another avenue of writing that I'm going to pursue. And
so is this going to be sort of the same format, only in children's form for getting stories from kids, or what is is that what you're doing, or is it, how's that working? Yet. Oh, okay.
That's how I'm going to start.
Okay.
And how it takes me and where it takes me, I don't know. Like I said, I had a couple younger kids that had written stories in a couple of my books previously, and oh my God, you just need a tissue, right? And I said, you know, there's something here with kids, so that's an avenue I definitely want to go down, because they have so much to say, and sometimes they don't have an opportunity to say it.
Nope, and you know, it's a great way to focus them, and also just, you know, the mental health aspect of writing, which you do weave so wonderfully in all your projects, I think, and we don't even have time to go in that direction right now, but you know, that's evident in the stories that you're compiling. So
I tell you lots of stories.
Is there anything sort of for closing that you'd like to share with other writers, young writers, or even maybe, you know, looking towards to these younger writers, and, you know, advice or?
Absolutely. Do it. Just do it. Don't put it off any longer. Be committed, have a plan. Even if you say, you know, look, I'm going to write a page a week. If that's what you start with, that's great, and just go out and do it. Are you going to do it perfect and right all the time? Absolutely not. Are you going to have naysayers? Absolutely not. But you know what? You've got a story to tell, and you really need to tell it.
All right. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Eileen, for sharing your stories with us. And thank you for joining us with the Journey of a Story series. And if you'd like to join us in the studio, or if you're interested in learning more about our authors or the other authors that we've interviewed, please visit theroomtowrite.com, and have a nice day.